The door creaked open just after noon. A shaft of sunlight cut through the dusty haze of engine oil and cigarette smoke inside the old biker clubhouse. Classic rock hummed low from the corner speaker. Laughter echoed from the back table, and someone was halfway through tuning a worn-down Harley in the garage bay. No one noticed her at first. Just a girl, small, shoulders hunched, standing quietly in the doorway. She wore a hoodie 3 sizes too big, pulled low over her face despite the summer heat. Her hands were jammed deep in the front pocket. Her feet didn't move, just stood there like she wasn't sure if she belonged or if it was safe to try. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "He follows me, everywhere." The room didn't go silent all at once. It happened in ripples. First, Jack Morgan set down his coffee. Then Karen Reyes, leaning against the bar, turned slowly. The guy playing pool paused mid-shot. Even the old jukebox seemed to hum a little softer. Jack, 56 years old, with salt and pepper stubble and hands rough from welding and winters on the road, was the first to approach. He didn't say much, just showed his palms, kept his voice low. "You okay, sweetheart?" She shook her head, barely. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Karen stepped in beside Jack, her eyes scanning the girl's posture like a nurse sizing up a patient. Mike Turner, one of the younger riders, hovered nearby without crowding. Karen asked gently, "What's your name?" "Emily," the girl said. "Okay, Emily, you said someone's following you?" She nodded once. "He's outside." Jack motioned toward the door. "Can you show us?" She hesitated, then followed. They stepped out into the warm afternoon. The air buzzed with the hum of cicadas and distant traffic. A couple walked their dog across the street. A delivery truck rumbled by. For a moment, everything seemed painfully ordinary. But then Jack saw it. A silver sedan, slow, deliberate, passing the block for the second time in under 5 minutes. Tinted windows, no plates visible. It didn't speed, didn't stop, just circled. Jack's jaw tightened. Mike swore under his breath. Karen didn't say a word. Her eyes were locked on Emily, who now wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to shrink out of sight.
"That's him," she whispered. "He does this every day, sometimes for hours." They brought her back inside, away from the windows. The clubhouse, once filled with the smell of grease and laughter, felt heavier now. The others picked up on the shift. The music was turned down. Conversation stopped. Jack pulled out a chair for Emily. She sat like someone who hadn't felt steady ground in a long time. Jack didn't press. He just said, "Start from the beginning." And she did. Emily's voice didn't shake this time. Sitting there in the clubhouse, surrounded by strangers who were listening, really listening, she spoke in full sentences, like she had rehearsed it all in her head 100 times and finally had the chance to let it out. It had started about 6 months ago. At first, it was just messages on social media, friendly, harmless, compliments on her photos, a joke here and there, questions about school, music, summer plans. She assumed he was a kid from another high school, maybe a grade or 2 ahead. He seemed nice, until he didn't. His name was Tyler Grayson. He was 21. She didn't know that at first. By the time she found out, the messages had already piled up. 10 became 30, then too many to count. When she slowed her replies, he noticed. He'd message more, say he just wanted to talk, ask why she was ignoring him. Then came guilt. Then came anger. When she blocked him, he made new accounts. When she changed her privacy settings, he found other ways in. Friends of friends, classmates, even her mom's work Facebook. And then he showed up, outside her school, at the gas station down the block from her house. Once she saw him parked across the street for almost 2 hours. She told her mom. They went to the police. The first time, the officer nodded a lot, wrote some notes, told them they'd look into it. Nothing happened. The second time, they filed for a protective order. It was approved, but 2 weeks later they got a call saying it had been dismissed, an administrative error. That's what the clerk said. Emily looked down at the table when she said, "I found out why." Jack leaned in gently. "Why, sweetheart?" She took a breath. "His dad's connected, donates to campaigns, sits on a hospital board, stuff like that. Everyone around here knows his name." Karen cursed under her breath. Mike leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Jack just nodded slowly. He had seen this pattern before. Not just once, too many times. Victims told to be careful, to vary their routines, to take a different route home, to be less visible, like it was their responsibility to not be followed. According to data from the Department of Justice, more than 1 in 6 women in the United States have experienced stalking at some point in their lives. For women under the age of 25, the number is even higher. The American Psychological Association reports that victims often experience anxiety, sleep disruption, and difficulty focusing, especially when they feel isolated or disbelieved. Emily was 16. She hadn't just felt isolated. She had been taught by silence to stop asking for help. The school counselor had advised her to keep a low profile. The assistant principal told her mother, "We take this seriously, but unfortunately we can't control what happens off school property." They suggested Emily avoid walking home alone, maybe stay late in the library or use a different entrance each day. All of it boiled down to the same message: survive quietly and maybe he'll get bored. But Tyler didn't get bored. He got bolder. Jack clenched his fists under the table as he listened. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about a system that kept shrugging its shoulders while girls like her learned to be smaller just to feel safe. A silver sedan outside was only the surface. The real danger was underneath, in every excuse, every ignored warning, every door that closed before it ever opened. The air in the clubhouse that evening was still heavy with what Emily had shared. No one was rushing into action. This wasn't that kind of story, the kind where someone charges out into the street and delivers justice with fists. That might feel good in movies, but here, in the real world, a single mistake could destroy everything. Jack knew that. So did Karen and Mike and every member of the Liberty Brotherhood riders who sat around that scarred wooden table as the sun dipped below the horizon. Jack leaned back in his chair and said, "We're not going to make this worse for her. We're going to make it right, and we're going to do it smart." They started by keeping watch, not stalking the stalker, just observing, quietly. Mike rode past the school after class let out each day. Karen parked down the street from Emily's home, pretending to read a book or scroll her phone, but always watching. Tyler's silver sedan kept showing up. Sometimes it circled the block once, sometimes 5 times. He always kept just enough distance to stay out of trouble, but not far enough to be innocent. Mike recorded video of the car passing at the same time each day. Karen took photos of the license plate. Jack kept a log, time-stamping each event. After 1 week, they had evidence of Tyler's vehicle appearing near Emily's school or home 9 separate times. None of it screamed crime on its own, but together it began to paint a picture, one that could no longer be ignored. It wasn't enough, though. Jack knew that. What they needed now was someone inside the system who still gave a damn. That's when Karen mentioned Detective Laura Brennan. A 15-year veteran, Brennan had a reputation for being sharp, relentless, and, according to some of her superiors, difficult, which, in their experience, just meant she didn't look the other way when things got political. Karen had worked with her years ago on a domestic violence case that nearly got buried until Brennan forced it to trial. Jack made the call. They met 2 days later in a quiet booth at a Highwoody diner just outside city limits. Brennan wore plain clothes, hair tied back, eyes sharp behind thin glasses. She didn't say much at first, just listened, asked the right questions, jotted notes.
After Emily's story and the documentation were laid out, Brennan tapped her pen against the table and said, "You're asking me to dig into a kid whose father plays golf with the district attorney." Jack nodded. "No, we're asking you to do your job." Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I've tried before with that family. Evidence vanished. Witnesses backed out. One time my own report got rewritten before it even hit the file system." "So is that a no?" Karen asked. "No," Brennan said. "That's a yes. But if we do this, we do it perfectly. No threats, no confrontations. Everything logged, everything time-stamped. One slip and they bury us." Jack reached across the table and shook her hand. "Deal." Meanwhile, 2 states away, Kate Morgan, the journalist and Jack's older sister, was deep in the kind of digging most people walk away from. Kate had left town years ago after her own scars with the legal system, but she still had fire in her. When Jack called her about Emily, she didn't hesitate. She opened her laptop, poured coffee, and started going through every public record she could find. Within hours, she found gaps, complaints that had been filed and mysteriously dropped, restraining orders that vanished from databases, and 3 other young women from the same region who had described similar stories over the past decade. One of them was named Sophie, now 26. Kate reached out respectfully. Sophie replied within the hour. They spoke for almost 2 hours. Sophie's story was nearly identical to Emily's, down to the car, the gifts, the guilt, the fear. Her parents had hired an attorney once, only to be told quietly that pursuing the case might bring problems for the family. Sophie had left for college and never returned. When Kate asked, "Would you be willing to share your story on the record?" Sophie hesitated, then said, "Yes, I'm tired of being silent. Use my name." Back at the clubhouse, Jack and the writers had created a timeline of sightings, screenshots of messages, location logs, and photos. Brennan took it all and began cross-referencing it with surveillance footage from stores near the school. The pattern was obvious now. This wasn't paranoia. It was a deliberate, persistent form of psychological stalking. The American Psychological Association defines stalking as a pattern of unwanted attention that causes fear or distress. According to the FBI, it's often the precursor to more severe abuse, and yet over half of all stalking cases in the country never lead to charges. The reasons? Lack of clear evidence, political pressure, and fear. But this time there was something different. This time people weren't looking away. They were documenting, connecting dots, refusing to let another girl become another footnote in a sealed report. The article went live early Monday morning. Kate's story, complete with verified timelines, photographs, names, and testimony, began spreading before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. By 9 o'clock, local news outlets had picked it up. By noon, Tyler Grayson's name was trending. His father's legal team issued a statement calling the piece reckless journalism, accusing the paper of running hearsay and speculation.
But it was not hearsay. It was not speculation. It was detail after detail, screenshot after screenshot, statement after statement. The picture was undeniable now, and this time, people were paying attention. The police department received more calls that day than it had in the last 2 months combined. School board members were questioned at town halls. City council members were asked whether campaign donations from the Grayson family would be returned. And then, 2 days later, it happened. The arrest. Detective Brennan and her team arrived at Tyler's home early in the morning with a signed warrant. No fanfare, no warnings, just quiet action. He was charged with multiple counts of stalking, harassment, and violation of an informal protection order. His father's lawyers were waiting at the station before Tyler even arrived, already preparing motions for dismissal. But this time, the evidence was airtight. The community was watching. The reporters were outside the courthouse with cameras rolling. And for once, it was not the girl who was being asked to explain herself. Bail was posted the same afternoon. Of course it was. But something had shifted. When Tyler walked out of that building, there were people staring, not shouting, not threatening, just staring. Parents holding their kids closer, store owners turning away. The insulation that had once protected him, his last name, his money, his father's reach, had cracked. The court case dragged on for months. Motions were filed, deadlines pushed, old connections quietly activated behind closed doors. The sentence, when it came, was not what many hoped for. Time served, probation, mandatory counseling, and a formal restraining order that, for once, could not be quietly dismissed. But it was not nothing. It was a dent, a break in the pattern. And for Emily, it meant one thing above all else. He was gone. 3 months later, the Graysons' house was empty. No moving trucks, no announcements, just a for sale sign and silence. Jack heard it from Brennan. He waited a few days before telling Emily. She was sitting in the back of the clubhouse, sipping a root beer, surrounded by people who now felt like family. When he told her, she did not cry. She did not cheer. She just nodded slowly, like she was trying to remember what it felt like to breathe without fear.
Karen asked, "You okay, honey?" Emily thought for a second, then said, "I do not know yet, but I think I will be." Life did not snap back to normal. That is not how trauma works. But little by little, Emily returned to herself. She started eating lunch at school again. She laughed more easily. She stopped checking over her shoulder every 5 minutes. Her mom, Linda, finally slept through the night without waking to the sound of imagined footsteps. The chair that had once been wedged beneath Emily's bedroom door, it stayed in the closet now. As for the Liberty Brotherhood riders, they had their own battles to fight. The code inspector showed up twice more. The fire marshal filed a new report that mysteriously added violations that had never been mentioned before. But something beautiful happened. Donations started coming in, anonymous envelopes, handwritten notes. A roofer offered free repairs. A retired plumber patched the heating system. The landlord, once eager to sell, suddenly had a change of heart. Pressure, it turned out, could work both ways. Kate received a regional journalism award for her work. She did not attend the ceremony. Instead, she drove back to town and had dinner with Jack. They did not talk much about the article. They didn't need to. They just sat on the porch, watching the stars blink into view, sharing silence only siblings can carry. One Saturday afternoon, Emily showed up at the clubhouse with a tray of cookies. They were a little burnt on the edges, slightly misshapen. She apologized with a laugh and left them on the counter. Before she walked out, she turned to Jack and said, "Thank you for believing me." Jack shook his head. "You saved yourself, kid. We just made sure you did not have to do it alone." She smiled, walked out into the sunlight, and for the first time in a long time, she looked like a teenager again. Because this was never just about one girl, or one car, or one name. This was about how systems protect power instead of people, and what happens when ordinary folks, bikers, teachers, mothers, sisters, choose not to look away, choose to stand their ground, and choose to hold the line no matter what it costs. So if you're listening to this and you're wondering what you would have done, ask yourself this: what will you do next time?